Hi everybody, David here with Cascade Components. Today we're going to be covering the installation of the Cascade Components 5010 link onto the Santa Cruz 5010. To install the link on your 5010, you'll need a torque wrench with the appropriate size bits, a shock pump, the Cascade Components link itself with the flip chip. You'll need an 8mm, 6mm, and 5mm Allen wrenches, some grease, a rag, and some way to tie up the rear triangle. In this case, we're going to use some toe straps off of some old pedals. So the first step in installing the Cascade Components link on your bike is getting the back wheel out of the way. The next step is getting your hardware loosened, so we'll go through and we'll remove these collet bolts. Okay, once these are removed, we'll set these aside. The next step is you'll grab your 6mm Allen wrench. You can insert it in these bolts. Just give a slight twist and the collet comes out. I'll do the same here, and these can be set aside. The next step is we're going to loosen up the two lower link pivots here. And once these are loose, we can remove the rear pivot and we can pull the pivot bolt out and let the rear triangle gently down. The next step is we'll grab our rope or string or whatever we're going to use to suspend the rear triangle and get the rear triangle raised out of the way. Now on the link itself, there's going to be two bearing covers. There's a strong chance that they'll fly out, but that's fine. Just keep tabs of where they end up. Now that we have the rear triangle secured out of the way, we'll come through and we'll loosen our shock bolt with a 6mm Allen wrench. And at this stage, the shock bolt can be removed. It can help to put a finger on the other side of the bolt here so the flip chip doesn't fall out. And we'll grab the bolt and both sides of the flip chip. Set these aside. The last step in removing the stock link is removing the front pivot bolt. So let's get that out of the way. Once you have the bolt removed, you can remove the link itself. And the stock link is out. So we'll pull these bearing covers and get them cleaned up because they will be reused on the Cascade Components link. So because these bearing covers will be reused, we'll pull them all off. There's 4 of them and we'll get them cleaned up. The stock link can be set aside. It's also a good idea to clean up your main pivot bolts. It's also a good idea to clean up the remainder of your hardware. Okay, now that we have all of our hardware cleaned up, we want to apply a little bit of grease to it. Just a couple dabs on each of these bearing spacers. We have a little grease gun, but you can just use regular grease. And we'll put a little bit on our pivot hardware and help spread it around there with your finger. Now we'll grab the Cascade Components link, and we can grab all 4 of these bearing covers, and the grease will help them stick onto the bearings themselves, which makes things easy. The link is now prepped and we're ready to install the Cascade Components link onto the bike. Off camera, we went around the frame and we just cleaned some extra grease and mud off there to get it ready for the link install. So we have our link with the bearing covers, and then we have the shorter of the 2 axles. So the process for installing the link is get it inserted into the frame. Once everything is lined up, the front axle can go in and start threading in. If you don't have any Loctite on the threads, it's not a bad idea to apply a couple drops to the threads only. And we'll go ahead and snug this up. Okay, that is now snug. We'll come through later and torque it. The next step in the process is installing the flip chip. So there's 2 halves of it, and we're going to install this in the short bevel position, which is the flip chip oriented up like this. To do that, I find it's easiest to put the chip on the drive side, so you can hold it with your fingers. Push the link forward until it lines up. Get your bolt started, and then get your shock lined up, and you can thread in your bolt. From here, we'll use our 6mm Allen wrench, and we'll snug this down. And because of the orientation of the link and the frame here, it is the proper time to torque up the shock mount bolt. So the shock bolt is torqued to 16 Newton meters. Your best reference for torque specs is the Santa Cruz website. Okay, now that we have the shock bolt torqued, we're going to bring the swing arm back down into position. You'll have to maneuver it here, make sure your two bearing spacers are in place. And now we'll grab the remaining pivot axle, get everything lined up, and insert your axle. Now that we have the axle started, we'll go ahead and snug it up. Now that we have all of our hardware back in place, this is the correct time to go through and torque it. Again, the Santa Cruz website is a great resource for the torque specs for these two bolts. The last step in the reassembly is installing these wedge washers. Just a little dab of grease on the outside of each one will help everything go together nice. Now that we have some grease on these, they just go into place. And we'll snug up the bolts. Now that the bolts are snug, we'll go through and torque them to spec. Now that we've verified that all the hardware is back in place, torqued properly, and ready to go, we can get the back wheel on the bike. Now that you have the back wheel installed on your 5010, the next step is to set your sag. Most people will like to run between 28 and 30% sag. If you have any questions on how to set up your sag, we have another video explaining that. Once you get your sag set, the last step is just to go ride. So go out on the trail, ride, make any adjustments to your compression, rebound, and air pressure that you might want to make the bike suit your riding style. Well, there you have it. That wraps up the install of the Cascade Components link on the Santa Cruz 5010. For more information on this link or any of the other links that we make, feel free to check us out at cascadecomponents.bike.